The Chinese Fire Lancers have been torching up the battlefield lately in Age of Empires 4 with their unique mechanic and high damage output, with many posts online calling them straight up overpowered. But are they really? Welcome to Edge of Noob everyone, and let's analyze the strengths and weaknesses of this unique Chinese unit and whether or not the call for a nerf currently is justified. Let's dive right in. Alright, before we begin, let's start with some basic stats. First of all, to unlock the Fire Lancers, you will need to be in the Castle Age and in the Yuan Dynasty, which means you need to have both the Astronomical Clock Tower as well as the Imperial Castle built. Of course, if you build the Spirit Way in the Imperial Age, you will retain your access to the Fire Lancers and potentially produce them with a 30% discount on nearby stables. The Fire Lancers cost 80 food, 20 wood, and 20 gold to produce for a total of 120 resources. In contrast, the Horseman costs 100 food and 20 wood for a total of 120 as well. And the Lancer, which is identical to the Knight, costs 140 food and 100 gold, double the cost of either cavalry at a total of 240 resources. Because Lancer and Fire Lancer are too similar in name, I'm going to call Lancers Knights from here on out to avoid any confusion. Of course, the Fire Lancers and the Horsemen are classified as light cavalry, while the Knights are classified as heavy cavalry. Looking at the Castle Age with no upgrades, the Veteran Horseman has 155 HP and 1 Pierce Armor, the Fire Lancer has only 135 HP and no armor whatsoever, and the Knight has a whopping 230 HP and 4 of each melee and Pierce Armor. You might be surprised to hear that the Fire Lancer is the slowest of the 3 cavalry, despite being a light cavalry itself. In terms of attack, the Horseman and the Fire Lancer have both 11 base attack, while the Knight has 36. However, both the Horseman and the Fire Lancer have a bonus damage of 11 against range units. And here's the kicker. The Fire Lancer not only has an additional bonus area of effect damage of 21 when it charges against units, but also a whopping 51 torch damage. In contrast, the Knight and the Horseman have only 16 torch damage, which means one Lancer does more damage than 3 of either of them. And finally, all 3 cavalry units have an additional plus 10 torch damage against siege weapons. You may have shrugged off an important detail I just mentioned. Get this, the Fire Lancers, as mentioned before, deal 51 torch damage against buildings every 2 seconds. The Ram, on the other hand, does 260 damage every 5 seconds. That's right, 2 Fire Lancers do more damage to buildings than 1 Ram. Their elite versions do even more torch damage at 55 a hit. Indeed, they are not as tanky, but they're cheaper and most importantly, they are super fast compared to the Rams and can disengage out of bad positions. Okay, on paper, they are already looking very good, but let's explore their unique area of effect charging damage mechanic even further to fully understand how they work before we get into the tests. When I lined up some villagers and charge attack to the middle villager, I had to double check that I didn't do something wrong. If you think the Landsknechts did a ton of trample damage, listen closely. The Fire Lancer did 100% of its 21 charge damage to the first 4 villagers, 100% of its damage to the next 4 villagers behind the first 4, and 100% of its damage again to the last 2 in the middle behind the second 4 villagers. This means that if your opponent has equally spaced out units as such, you deal a whopping 210 damage in 1 charged attack, and that's only from 1 Lancer. As is the case with the Landsknechts, if your Fire Lancer catches enemy units even more tightly packed, then you'll dish out even more damage. As you can see here, the Fire Lancer was able to hit 17 villagers simultaneously in 1 charged attack, dealing a whopping 357 damage in 1 hit. Obviously, this will be a rare occurrence, and the actual damage in the game will be lower due to the spacing out of the enemy units, so keep that in mind. But man, if you catch your enemies bundled up, you will get some big hits. Okay, but what about the cooldown of this charge? Can you repeatedly run away and hit again? Turns out, although this isn't written anywhere in the game or on the wikis, the cooldown of the charged attack is 10 seconds. Hence, you can technically unleash your explosive charge on your opponents once, retreat, and do it again within 10 seconds. This will be especially effective against units that are slower than the Fire Lancers. In case you didn't know, there's a very clear indicator that the attack will be a charged one. The Fire Lancer points his lance straight forward and right at the enemy when instructed to attack, whereas the Fire Lancer approaches the target with his lance pointing upwards when the charge is on cooldown. It's visually very easy to tell. Based on what we see here, the Fire Lancers seem like a powerhouse of a unit, but the developers call them quote-unquote weak in melee combat. So let's test the validity of that statement, how they do against other units, and check if there are any easy ways to counter them. Let's jump right into the tests. I will be testing them based on equal resources, and for simplicity, I'll assume all resources are of equal value. Also, all of the units are fully upgraded generic Castle Age units. Okay, let's start with the Spearman. In a 15 versus 10 fight, with the Spearmen successfully bracing for the Fire Lancer's charge, the Spearmen naturally obliterate the Fire Lancers, with 14 of them surviving the engagement. But of course, nobody in their right mind would charge into the spearmen head-on, so let's try something out. Turns out, even if you micro your Fire Lancers to bait out the brace and try engaging again, the newly patched spearmen do a fantastic job at re-bracing every time the Fire Lancers try to charge in. Hence, never ever engage into a spearman unless you somehow catch them from behind while they're fighting other units in front of them. Moving on to the mana terms, it's a 10 versus 10 fight with equal resources, and my goodness, it's not even close. The mana terms get absolutely obliterated by the fireworks, with all 10 of the Fire Lancers surviving. You should have guessed that the English or their Holy Roman Empire's mana terms don't matter here as well. As you can see, they simply cannot survive the initial charge damage. In short, all mana terms are absolutely awful against them, as they cannot even disengage or run away due to their much lower speed. If they get caught, they are dead. It's really that simple. Just for fun, let's try the Landsknechts, but I kind of know already where this is going. Landsknechts are much more expensive than the Fire Lancers, but I'll put them in equal numbers just to prove my point. Oh boy, literally 0 damage dealt to the Fire Lancers. The Fire Lancers outrange and outnuke the Landsknechts. This is easily the worst engagement you can take against the Fire Lancers. Okay, let's do one final test before we move on to the cavalry. What if we actually use our brain and have 3 spearmen mixed in with 5 Landsknechts? Well, there is a bug with the Holy Roman Empire's spears because they refuse to embrace for the charge. Hence, until that is fixed, don't even bother using spears against the Fire Lancers as the Holy Roman Empire, or otherwise you'll get shredded. Okay, now let's look into the cavalry. Moving on to the horsemen, it's another 10 versus 10 fight with equal resources. And just like the mana terms, it's not even close, with 10 of the Fire Lancers surviving. Obviously, horsemen are faster than the Fire Lancers, so if you are using the horsemen, never ever take this fight and flee whenever you can. Alright, let's look into the knights now. Since knights cost twice as much, it'll be a 5 versus 10 fight. Remember, the knights also have a charge attacker of their own, and in this tough, close fight, the knights barely win, with a combined HP of only 70 remaining on the knights. This means that the engagement can be a coin flip based on how good the charged attack will be of the Fire Lancers. Now, someone can say, as the Fire Lancers, you can charge the knights, retreat, and then re-engage to win the engagement at the end, but you simply cannot do that. I know it's counterintuitive, but you have to remember that the knights are faster than the Fire Lancers, and they will always catch up to them and not allow them to charge again. Hence, you'll have to fight the knights head-on, and you'll need slightly more than 2-to-1 ratio to engage comfortably against the knights and win consistently. Obviously, you'll have to be more careful against, say, French Royal Knights, or when biology is researched in the Imperial Age. Here's a curious thought though. What if we space out our units to take even better engagements as the knights? The Fire Lancers formation doesn't really matter as the knights will pick a target to hit the charge attack anyway, but the Fire Lancers charge relies on spacing quite a bit. Let's test it out. Turns out, it really doesn't matter too much, as the AoE effect of the Fire Lancer is simply too large to realistically space them out even further. Hence, don't even bother, just charge straight ahead if you're using knights. Okay, let's do another test. What if we retreat with 4 of the knights at the last second and let the 1 knight tank all of the charge damage of the Fire Lancers and re-engage again with the 4 knights? Would it make a difference? Turns out it does, but only slightly. Since the fight effectively turns into a 4v10, the advantage of not tanking the Fire Lance charge dissipates. However, just as you can micro away your units at the last second, so can your opponent. Hence, if they are paying close attention, you'd essentially be throwing away a knight. It's a risky play, to say the least. Now, if I close the loop on the Fire Lancers versus Knights with the conclusions above, I'd be doing you folks a disservice. If some of you have been paying close attention, you should have asked for a larger engagement. Remember, the Fire Lancers are all about shock and one-shotting. So, let's see what happens in a 10 versus 20 fight. Absolute domination. 19 Fire Lancers survive as most of the knights are nuked to oblivion. Just like the Landsknechts, the Fire Lancers do better in numbers. Hence, the real cutoff against knights is around 10 units of equal resources. The larger the battle gets, the worse it'll end up for the knights, assuming you can get decent charge hits and not bag out due to pathing. Alright, the final set of melee units that are left are anti-cavalry cavalry units, namely the Camel Riders and the War Elephants. In the 5 versus 10 equal resources fight, the camels are able to tank through the charged attack as 4 of them survive the battle in a convincing win. But as we saw with the knights, the results change when the numbers double. In the 10 versus 20 fight, the camels are barely, just barely able to win, with 1 lonely wounded camel walking away alive from the fight. When we double the numbers again in a 20 versus 40 fight, pathing issues come to play here. Some of the Fire Lancers simply cannot find a proper spot to engage against the camel, and that costs the Fire Lancers the engagement. 4. Badly wounded camels survive the battle. In short, if you're fighting against camels, ensure that you have at least 15 to 20 fire lancers to have a close fight in equal resources. That said, when you think about it, it's still kind of ridiculous that an anti-cavalry unit is struggling this much against a light cavalry unit in equal resources. Hence, camels have a slight edge over the fire lancers in numbers, but I wouldn't consider them a hard counter unless you're fighting them in really low numbers. And finally, the mighty war elephants. This may sound funny, but the equal resources fight is 3 elephants versus 25 fire lancers. And guess what? The 3 elephants crush every single one of the 25 fire lancers with more than half of their combined HP still remaining. Hence, even as high as 25 in numbers, it's a bad idea to engage against the elephant. You'll lose every time no matter how you cut it. Obviously, the war elephants will never be able to catch up to the fire lancers. So, realistically, war elephants aren't really a problem to the fire lancers. It's really your choice if you want to do something really stupid with your fire lancers or not. To wrap up, there is seriously no regular melee units in the game right now that can fight the fire lancers head-on except the anti-cavalry units, especially the spearmen and the war elephants. Everyone else can either barely hold on or get absolutely demolished. Moving on to the ranged units, let's start with the archers. Normally, the equal resources fight would be 15 archers against 10 fire lancers, but I'll only use 5 fire lancers to prove a point. It's a bloodbath. And in case you're wondering what an equal resources fight looks like, here it is. The fire lancers bombarded the archers' asses back to Mongolia in one charged hit. I don't believe there's any other unit in the game that is able to kill archers this brutally and quickly. In short, if you get caught on the field, you're toast. Pretty much the same thing applies to the crossbows as well. Yes, foot archers die to pretty much all cavalry charges, but there's nothing close to fire lancers exploding your archers in literally 1 second and disengaging away from the battle. Knights and horsemen take more time to kill your units, so you have some more time to react with spears or other melee units to save yourself a bit, but not with the fire lancers. As a side note, longbows with palings in front of them in niche scenarios can also work, but it's way too unreliable and risky. Just for fun, I tried the Mangudai to see how they fare up against the fire lancers as well. Since the Mangudai are slightly faster, you can kite and kill the fire lancers if you're running away in a straight line without losing a single Mangudai. However, as is the case in a real game, you often have to change angles and you'll have to look into your economy while you run away. Hence, even with some imperfect micro, you still are able to win the engagement with equal resources with some losses. Overall, you shouldn't be afraid to engage the fire lancers with Mangudai as long as you have the critical mass and are paying close attention. And no, don't even try the horse archers or even the camel riders. The fact that they have to stop and fire becomes their death sentence, as you'll lose your critical mass on the very first stop and eventually lose everything. The Mangudai are pretty much the only ranged units in the game that can deal with fire lancers on their own. Everyone else needs some sort of melee support and a lot of prayer to not be blown up to pieces. Well, that pretty much wraps it up for the unit matchups. But there's one more very important element that we haven't fully explored yet, and that's their insanely high torch damage. Let's start with the siege units. Other melee units do decent torch damage against siege units, with plus 10 additional damage added to their torch damage, which is either 16 or 20 depending on whether they are in the castle or Imperial Age. But it's not even close to the damage output of the fire lancers, as they get the plus 10 damage as well on top of their insane torch damage. They consistently do more than 3 times the damage than any other melee unit. This makes them insanely good at sniping siege, as they can one-shot many siege weapons in numbers and then promptly disengage. Okay, the final piece, and perhaps one of the most important elements, is the Fire Lancer's insane damage on buildings. To give you a bit of perspective, here's every Chinese unit you'd use against buildings and their damage output per second. Remember, all other melee units do only 16 torch damage in the Castle Age, so almost 1/3 the damage output of the Fire Lancers. Here's the damage output per second once we normalize things based on resources spent, i.e., while Rams do more damage against buildings in equal numbers, Fire Lancers do more damage when we spend equal resources. This fact alone is worrisome, but this is not the full story. Let's get some more perspective. First of all, Fire Lancers cannot attack stone walls, while other siege units can, so obviously this is one of the big differences. It's kind of funny that we have to compare a man and a horse with some fire on his stick to complex siege weapons in the first place, but hey, this is peak Age of Empires logic right here. But if stone walls are not a part of the equation, things get dicey very quickly. Here's a test of 10 Rams going towards and taking out a town center. As you can see, they do a pretty good job at taking out the town center fairly quickly. It takes them roughly 18 seconds to approach the town center from that distance and destroy it. In equal resources, let's see how 25 Fire Lancers do. In literally 2 hits, the Fire Lancers obliterate the town center. It takes them only 11 seconds to approach and destroy the town center from that distance. Obviously, they can now easily move on to the next target to nuke it down and then do it again and again, whereas the rams are slow and susceptible to melee damage. Of course, while rams are susceptible to melee damage, they aren't to pierce. So let's test against the keeps. The rams, of course, take minimal damage and bring down the undefended keep in roughly 23 seconds, approaching from that distance. Again, there are no pathing problems here, so the result is optimal for the rams. The Fire Lancers, on the other hand, bring down the keep in roughly 16 seconds. You do lose 3 out of the 25 Fire Lancers there, however, so keep that in mind. Hence, if there aren't many archers or keeps around, you'll have to be more careful, just as you have to be careful around melee units or villagers when you attack with rams. As you can see here, their damage against buildings is straight up ridiculous. Although these type of units existed in Age of Empires 2, such as the Arambai or Shotel warriors, those units were so easy to kill and had so many different counter units you could go for. Hence, they were mostly reserved as meme strategies or in very niche shock scenarios. The Fire Lancers, on the other hand, can obliterate your archers and melee units in one charge, destroy an important building or two, and then promptly disengage whenever they feel like they're in danger. This is why the Fire Lancers, especially in team games, are just awful to play against. Even if you're having a good game, unless you're fully stonewalled, one group of 25 or 30 Fire Lancers can straight up just snipe all of your landmarks in the blink of an eye. And that's the problem. You'll often find folks on the forums or Reddit just dismissing the fact and say, hey, you should just make spears or you should just wall up. But that's not a fair argument. Spears cannot engage against the Fire Lancers, which means a smart opponent will always run away and avoid spears. Asking someone to fully stonewall every game they play against the Chinese is also ridiculous. It hinders your gameplay because you know you have to wall up every freaking game. And one of the most important aspects that people are forgetting here is the fun factor. It's just not fun to play against something that obliterates you within a matter of seconds. Seriously, one hole in your wall, one mistake, one bad engagement, and it's game over. You play 30, 45, 60 minutes in a team game only to find out that one hole led to you losing all of your keeps, town centers, and landmarks within a minute. And not to mention that the Rus and Mongols will get wrecked regardless because they don't get any stone walls. No other unit in Age of Empires 4 can ruin your game this quickly. To wrap up, the Fire Lancers can either destroy or take disengagements against every melee unit except the spears, the camels, and the war elephants, and they straight up destroy all ranged units except the Mangudai on an open field. They are excellent raiders, excellent chargers, excellent against buildings, excellent against siege units, and have excellent mobility, all for the price of a freaking horseman. And they train faster than any other comparable unit via easy to build stables with very limited counterplay against them. Did I mention that you can also get them 30% cheaper through the Spirit Way as well? So, to answer the initial question I posed, yes, I do believe that the Fire Lancers have way too much going on for them in the current patch, and they need to be tuned down. Personally, I think their AoE damage needs to be staggered with distance, just like the Landsknechts, and not apply all of their 100% of their damage on a ridiculous AoE. Second, I think that knights should be able to do slightly better against them, as the fights shouldn't be this close. Same thing goes with the camels, for heaven's sake. And third, there is no world in which Fire Lancers should be priced the same as the horsemen. Nobody in their right mind would choose the horsemen over the Fire Lancers once they're unlocked. I think they should be priced somewhere between the knight and the horseman to balance them out, and they probably should have a slightly longer training speed than the horsemen. Finally, their torch damage against buildings should either be reduced or capped somehow. I understand that they can retain their unique ability as raiders, but they shouldn't be able to burn down an entire town within minutes. Make no mistake, I'm definitely not calling them to be nerfed to the ground at all and make them useless. I just want the developers to tweak them enough to not make the game unfun for players who play against them. Even if they retain their characteristics, we need a better counterplay to them than, hey, just make more spears and chase them away. That's not the answer. Wow, this video turned out to be much longer than I originally anticipated, as the Fire Lancer has a ton of nuance to it than most units. I hope you've enjoyed this tightly packed analysis of the Fire Lancers, so if you'd like to see more of this type of content, be sure to like and subscribe to not miss out on any of the new videos to come. The Fire Lancer was suggested by many of you in the comment section below in previous videos, so please continue to comment and give ideas on units or game mechanics that you'd like me to explore further. As always, thanks for watching everyone, remember to brace your spearmen against the Fire Lancers, and see you all in the next one.